the emphasis here is really just around impact, right? It's about momentum, which is mass combined with movement, right? And um, you heard PJ say everyone should have their own impact project. Because the truth is, like he said, many times people have their minds focused and set on how am I gonna how am I gonna achieve this next goal so that I can like up my status or like make a little bit more money. Um, and that's actually what I want to talk about here, which is creating wealth through impact. And there seems to be this tension that exists between accumulating wealth and finding purpose in life. I tell you, man, like these two ideas have been like top of mind for me for like the last 20 years of my life. Um, and it sort of plays out in different aspects of life. So you sort of hear people say things like, look, let me make as much money as I can, and when I'm set, then I can then pursue my passion or do the things that I love to do or do the things that, that make a difference in the world. And that's sort of how people think about it. Um, I remember there was a time in my life as well, like I said, these two ideas have been core part of how I saw myself. But similarly, I wanted to focus on making money. I wanted to focus on my career, on being a businessman, and so on and so forth. And I remember one day during one of my wipeouts, I remember exactly where I was. I was in a hotel room in Canada for work, and I had lost like my entire portfolio got wiped out in one trade. Um, and then I knelt by my bedside and I prayed. I'm like, God, you know what? I just want to, I know I'm supposed to be focused on impact, and focused on living a life that's purposeful, which deep down on the inside of us, we all know that living a life of purpose is the most meaningful way to live your life. And I prayed that prayer and I'm like, that's what I want to do right now. Now, it was a sincere prayer, but over the last few years, I've been reflecting on that tension and saying, do those two things have to be mutually exclusive? Does living a purposeful life have to be separate from how I live life when I'm actually pursuing growth, financially or accumulation of wealth? And as I began to think about that and reflect on that, one of the things that became very clear to me is the idea that the same principles of quote unquote impact are also the same principles by which you launch into a venture and you start a business. I heard a speaker say this once. He's like, so by the way, there's some economist who, I think from the University of Chicago actually many years ago, who said the purpose of a business is to make a profit. And this guy challenged that idea. He's like, that sounds very absurd. That the purpose of a business can't be to make a profit. That every business has to have a worthy cause. Every business has to have something that they're doing that's making a difference, right? And anyone here who's, financially savvy one way or the other, you understand that when you create value, people pay you for that value. So the reason why people are parting with their financial resources for what it is that you're offering is because you're creating value. Now, profit can't be the end goal in and of itself, right? Profit can be a means to the end. The end in and of itself is the value that you're creating for the benefit of others. Same thing when you're thinking about making impact in life. You're saying to yourself that, how can I add value into the lives of people around me in my sphere of influence in the community that I'm a part of? How can I do that? And then we have this concept of nonprofit organizations, right? Now, if one of those managers of a nonprofit goes around saying, the purpose of our business is so that we can raise money, you'd probably be like, dude, I'm not giving you my money, right? But they go out and they say things like, the purpose of our organization is to do this, is to do that, is to do this. But how they achieve that impact is by raising money. So it's just a tactical difference from what a for-profit organization is doing, but inherently, they are doing the same things, which is ultimately creating value in society and then communicating that value to people who are around them. So in reflecting on all of this, I started thinking to myself that how does that play in our individual lives, right? Because we've heard about purpose, we've heard about impact, we've talked about wealth, all things that are very important to us. And the first thought here is identity, right? Because I'm reflecting on my story as well, and some of it we talked about here earlier on with my friend Dami. And it's the thought here is that if you think about identity refers to your sense of self and also your sense of worth. And the concept of identity has to be consistent in every single context that you're in. It can't change because that's who you are and that's what you're worth. Traditional theory in identity or traditional formation of identity was such that your sense of self came from your community that you were in, right? So, and then your sense of worth came to the extent that you measured up to that community standard, so that value system in that community. So if you think historically, if you were a smith, you came from a family of blacksmiths, right? So therefore, as you were growing up in life, what you did was you were going to be a blacksmith. If you did anything different from that, you were shamed and you lost your sense of identity or your sense of self-worth and your sense of self in that community. You progress into the postmodern society right now, it's very different. And the system of identity formation in the postmodern world right now is such that your sense of self, quote unquote, comes from you looking within. So like, speak your truth, look on the inside of you, find who you are, and then define what values you're okay with. These are the values that I consider important. So therefore, this is who I am, and these are the values that I consider as important. Now, this is like the story of every Disney, cartoon in the last few years that you've seen, right? It's about someone who's bucking the trend, finding themselves. But the problem with that system of formation is that your feelings change. How you think about yourself today is very different from how you think about yourself how you thought about yourself 10 or 20 years ago. So it's not consistent. It's not coherent as well. Because at the end of the day, you're still looking for some sort of validation. And as we talked about markets, you can't validate yourself by you determining what your own worth is. I can't tell you, this is worth $10,000 because I say it's worth $10,000, right? There has to be something that validates that worth. So there's an alternate system here, right, which is, of course, part of this is reflecting on, my spiritual perspective as well, is that I'm created in the image and in the likeness of God. So therefore, that has implications. My sense of value, my sense of worth doesn't come from my experiences, doesn't come from my losses, doesn't come from my familial background, doesn't come from anything that's necessarily in my environment. So my dignity as a person, and arguably your dignity as a person as well, is rooted deeply in the idea that you are in the image and in the likeness of God, who is the creator and who is the source of all life. That then affects how I interact with people in my space. That means that you have value, you have worth, and I ought to treat you as such. Going back to the question about how didn't you lose faith in humanity, well, this is part of it as well, is that I can look at people and I can see this is another image bearer, this is another human being with potential, this is another person with capability. So all through my life experiences, this is something that has kept me grounded, right? And the expression of all of that is what you see, is in the sense that my losses don't define me, my failures in life don't define me, my successes in life don't define me. What you think about me doesn't necessarily define me. My experience with you doesn't limit me as well and doesn't define me as well, right? So I have a solid foundation of who I am, irrespective of where I am in life. Now, the reason why this is important as we start thinking about impact or wealth creation, and you're probably thinking, okay, is he talking about impact or is he talking about making money? And the answer to that question is yes, it's both, right? Because what I really want to do is I want to blur those lines in our minds because I don't think there has to be a dichotomy. I don't think there has to be a separation. But you can live your life in a way such that you're meaningfully driving impact in your community, but at the same time, you're exchanging that value either for goodwill, that might be your choice, or you're exchanging that value for money. That's ultimately your choice. But the point is, your ethical system, because you have this sense of identity, is very different. So I'm not looking to exploit you so that I can get richer. But because I value you and I value your dignity as another person who's created in the image and likeness of God, I'm going to treat you as such and add value to your life and then look for a fair exchange with you versus trying to exploit you. Does that make sense? Yes. So that was that. So that's the first thought there. And there's a movie that I've watched that I like. How many people have seen like The Bourne Identity here, right? So, you know, the story about Jason Bourne, he has all these capabilities, and he wakes up, he has amnesia, he doesn't remember anything about himself. But the whole premise of the movie is, even though he has all these capabilities and talents and everything that's on the inside of him, the only way he could understand his path was if he knew who he was. And I think that that's the same with every single one of us in life, is that the way to understand my path, next steps, what it is that I'm supposed to be doing in life, is if I have this clarity of identity. The second thought here is around potential. Potential refers to your untapped abilities. It's everything. It's your unrealized success. It's your talents, your skills, all that stuff that's on the inside of you. Potential is always in dormant form. So meaning if you have achieved something, it's no longer potential. Potential is the next thing that you can do, but you haven't done it yet because you haven't tried it yet. And the reality of the situation here is this. Coming from this first thought around identity and being folks that are created in the image and likeness of God, is this thought here that everything that God creates, he creates with potential principle. Meaning everything that he creates has ability that's on the inside of it that's untapped. And the world does not reward you for potential. The world rewards you for potential that has been unleashed and that has been unlocked, because that's when it starts benefiting people. But you know, one thing about human beings is, human beings, on average, in all created creatures, we live life below our potential, below our maximum potential. And the reason why that's so is because we are creatures of choice. We have the ability to decide what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. The other thing as well that's worth noting about us as human beings is that we are wired for us to avoid losses, for us to avoid adversity, and for us to avoid danger. So what that then means is that anytime there's a crisis in front of me, anytime there's a challenge in front of you, your natural instinctive reaction is to recoil from that situation. But the truth about it is that your potential grows when you lean into crisis, when you lean into the discomfort, when you step outside of that comfort zone. And why I like this is, if I reflect on the story of creation that's in the Bible, in Genesis 1, the Bible tells us that God shows up on the scene and he's confronted with chaos. He's confronted with disorder. But what he does is that he speaks. And he means that he confronts that chaos, he confronts the disorderliness in the world with an idea, with a word, with a thought. And he is the one who has all potential on the inside of him, and then he begins to release that potential, and that's what we define as creation. So in essence, what is on the inside of us is able to shape and to contain the chaos that we might encounter in life and help us overcome that chaos in life. So you have potential on the inside of you, and you might enter into chaotic situations, you might enter into difficult situations, and the challenge here is for you to lean into those situations, because that's where the growth happens. That's when you start realizing that, oh my goodness, I have this ability that's on the inside of me, such that I can contain the chaos, and I can actually triumph over that chaos in my life. And that has been my story as well. I mean, I remember like all these things that we just talked about here, like the losses, like the negative experiences and whatnot. I'd always look at what's on the inside of me, and I'd say to myself that there's no reason why I can't triumph over this. Yes, I made a mistake, but there's a growth potential here for me. There's a growth opportunity here for me, and I just have to learn how to do it. I just have to learn how to work that system, and once I figure it out, it will also work for me, because we live in a world where there's principles. I remember the first time I did a deal where I came together with a group of folks, and I did an investment in real estate now. Going back, and I smile as I think about this, because I'm the guy who's lost investments that I had. I've been kicked out of my homes and whatnot. But here I am right now. I did my first deal with investing partners, and I raised what? About $400,000, right? I didn't have $400,000 in my bank account, but I wanted to do real estate investment again. Even after losing in real estate, most people would quit and tap out and be like, I'm not doing this. But I'm like, there's an opportunity to lean in here. There's an opportunity to grow here. There's potential on the inside of me that I want to exploit and I want to unleash. I tell you guys, I thought I was going to die raising $400,000. It took a lot from me to get to that place. But guess what? I raised that first $400,000. A few months after, there's a story there because I entered into chaos as well, but let's not even get into like another downturn in my life. But the next deal that I had to do, where I had to raise close to another $400,000, I did it in a couple of weeks. Why? Because when you do something, you break a barrier that you might have, you break an area where you might have friction in your life, and then you can do it again. So the challenge to you all is this, is when you're faced with crisis, you can reflect on what's on the inside of you and confront that crisis, confront that difficulty, lean in, embrace that discomfort, lean into that situation because that's how you ultimately are able to unlock the potential that's on the inside of you. Now, the third thought here is this. It's actually two in one, but hard work and excellence. Potential, if you think about this graph that I put here, potential is in your bottom right. Again, it's dormant. It's in there. It's in you. The things that you're capable of, right? You just have to take action and make a move in that particular area. But then, two things are required. Number one, you have to put in the effort. Like I said, the distance between where you are right now and where you can be is one, a knowledge gap, and two, it's an effort gap. So from a knowledge perspective, what do I need to know? Because the more I know, then I can apply myself to it. But then it also requires that I'm putting in some effort, right? Am I putting in the work to get from here to here? I can put in a lot of work, but I might not be moving forward, right? So for me to move forward, I have to say to myself, how do I make it better? How do I drive towards excellence? How do I drive towards improved quality and making things better? That's how I move from up here, and then I start moving to the right. And that's how you train and refine the potential. And I had a thought in here where I said, it's a knowledge gap, but that's not enough. Because there are a lot of people who get information, so much information, they know so much, but they don't do anything with that information. Knowledge and understanding become wisdom when you start applying yourself to it. Because when you start applying yourself to it, you start making mistakes. You start facing difficulty. You start getting into moments of crisis. But once you go through all of those difficulties, you have wisdom. Damien and I had a conversation today when we talked about risk. We've created our own sort of risk management strategies. There are certain things that we wouldn't do any longer, right? Because we have wisdom. We understand how certain things work. And as you keep pushing yourself, as you keep refining those qualities that are on the inside of you and applying yourself to work, the next thing is you have to aspire to be the best in your field because that's how you attain to mastery. The world does not remember people that are quote-unquote average. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to be, that there has to be average in the system, because when I look up in the skies at night, there are stars. Everyone can be a star. Everyone has a strength in one area. Everyone has an ability in one area. It's different from what my area is, but you're a star in your own right. And you can put in the work, and you can put in the effort to keep moving there so that you can attain to mastery in your field. And I say to myself that whether it's in investment banking, whether it's in finance, whether it's in real estate investing, yes, I do want to be in the top 10% operating in that field. How am I going to get there? Well, I know I have potential on the inside of me. I have certain skill sets and abilities. I can keep working. I can keep putting in the effort to ultimately get to where it is that I need to be at in life. I talked about the difficulty with raising $400,000. I'm glad to say last year I did a deal where I was able to raise $1.3 million. It was difficult for me to do that deal, to raise that $1.3 million, but guess what? I did it. Why? Because I kept on putting in the work. I leaned into the discomfort in there. I've gone from having foreclosures on my record right now to a place where right now I'm controlling and managing and owning over 30 units in the city of Chicago that are worth north of $10 million right now. Why? Because of leaning in, training oneself, and of course because of the grace of God that is upon my life. But that grace is there, it's potential. But how do I take that grace and make it into something that's meaningful is by putting in the work and by refining my skill sets. Now, what would be my goal this year? I want to double that number. I want to go from $10 million to $20 million this year. How am I going to do that? I'm going to lean into discomfort again. I'm going to say to myself that, you know what? I want to raise another $4 million. I want to raise another $3 million. Is it going to be hard? Absolutely going to be difficult. But guess what? Something being difficult isn't and shouldn't necessarily be a reason for you to recoil from a situation. It just means that I have to embrace that situation and then I have to lean into that situation. And then solving people's problems. Talked about this at the onset. It's the principle of value exchange, because as you do all of these things, you have created value on the inside of you. Now, everything that we do, if you look at the story of creation, we were created in the context of relationship. A market operates in the context of relationship. So we're here in the market today. The world doesn't pay you for the value that you have, or that you are, pardon me. It pays you for the value that you contribute to other people. So the question then becomes is, how do I take what I know? How do I take all my experiences? How do I take everything that I've done, all the problems that I can solve, and how do I start coming into contact with you all, or the people in my sphere of influence, and start providing that value to them? Because then I'm able to get an exchange, whether that's a monetary exchange by selling something to them, or get a goodwill exchange. Again, my goal here isn't necessarily to tell you one way or the other how you do that. You might hear this and you might be like, you know what? I want to have an impact project that doesn't necessarily require me charging people for something. It just means that I'm going to get goodwill in return. Absolutely, that's what I want you to do. Some of you might be thinking like, okay, I get it right now. I have this business idea, something that I've always wanted to work on right now. And so therefore, I'm going to lean into that situation right now. Absolutely, you should do that right now. That's my point, because these principles, these ideas are the same. You can create value, you can be the best in your field, you can be the best at what you're doing, but then offer that value to someone else that's in your field. Shift from thinking about how do I get wealthier, more comfortable for myself and for my family, to making your family the community of people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. Because by you doing that, by you impacting people, you're ultimately making the world a better place. Because Samuel is able to do what he's doing right now, I'm able to do what I'm doing right now. He's good at that. Because one day is able to, make the food that she's making. Yeah, she did charge me for it, but guess what? It's really good food. We're enjoying it right now. But the point I'm trying to make is that you all have something on the inside of you. And I want you to shift it from just thinking about myself and how does that benefit me, to how do I think about how does this impact other people? How do I contribute? How do I focus on solving people's problems as I interact with them? And this is the last slide that I have. So what next? We all have innate skills and abilities. I've talked about the fact that we have an identity that's rooted in God as the creator, that's stable, that's very coherent, that's immovable. So my sense of self-worth, your sense of self-worth, your sense of value comes from this concept of identity. Secondly, we talked about potential, the thought that everything that you've achieved up till now, right now, great, good for you. Or you might be a person who is new, you're fresh, and you're saying to yourself, I have all these dreams, I have all these things that I wanted to do. You know what? I'm just comfortable where I'm at right now. Like I said, don't quit on your dreams, don't quit on your aspirations, don't quit on yourself. My challenge to you is to lean into that situation. Reflect on what it is that you have, what it is that you can do, and ask yourself the question, what is the most transformative area of my life that I can develop right now? And I'm going to apply myself to work and apply myself to excellence in that particular area. And just think about it. Or maybe you're someone here, like you've got in your stride right now, like you're on a good roll. Remember, Potential is what you haven't done yet. It's the unrealized success. You might be comfortable right now because of what you're doing, but there's more on the inside of you. And that choice resides within you as an individual to make the decision to say, where I'm at right now, I can be better. There's more that's on the inside of me, and I can train myself, I can train my ability, I can lean into what feels a little bit uncomfortable so I can just get to the next level there. Again, the goal here is I'm not doing that for myself, I'm doing that so I can be more valuable in the context of the relationships that are around me in my life. Or you might be here right now and you're like, you know what, I got it all made. You know, like, I understand all of this, I'm doing great in life. And then my challenge to you is that why don't you start thinking about giving back to the folks that are around you? You've made a good living, you know, you've done some great things in life, but are there more people you can contribute to? Are there more people you can share your ideas with? Are there people that you can elevate? Are there people that you can bring up with you right now to the level that you're at right now? That's my challenge, because that's ultimately what momentum is all about. Is that one action, one decision, one move that you make has a knock-off effect all through life. And ultimately, if we all leaned into everything that God has placed on the inside of us and committed ourselves to offering that value to the people that are in our space, we would live in a much, much better world and in a much more beautiful world. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much. Thank you. With our last few minutes, I'd like us to do a session of just like Q&A. Maybe I'll invite Pastor Jimmy as well to come up here with me so we can have our Q&A session.